Okay, so it's Saturday, and I'm going to goof off a bit today and a bit tomorrow and finish this truck. Well, finished. Going to get it on the road. I'm going to be driving it by this time tomorrow, I swear. Really close. Really close. You might have seen the last video I was driving it around. Well, of course, I never got out of first gear and never took it off the property. But I've licensed and inspected and registered it, so it can go off on the road now. And I've just redone the airbag system. I think I might have mentioned that I didn't like the system I had going in the central toolbox, what I was calling the airbox. So what I've done, actually, I've set 4 regulators up front. These are nice ones because these are bulkhead mount regulators. You can see the regulators are inside here. I don't know if you can or not, enough light in there. So what I've basically done is this is left rear, left front, right rear, and it's just as easy as anything. I can adjust load heights from outside. Say I'm setting up for a hitch or something, or I can easily just reach down between my legs or down while I'm driving and adjust them. And so they work really well. So regulator really makes the most sense. All I have to do is wind up whatever pressure I like. See the truck coming up there? And this would be the left front. I mean, it's not very fast, but I'm not looking for expediency. And we'll wind all 4 corners up. There we go. About 5 inches of lift in the back. Again, not that it's lift I'm looking for, but that's the maximum height right there. So what I'll do right now, I've got no gauges attached, but I'll actually run gauges off here down through light lines, and I'll put 2 small gauges up here. I only need 2 for 4 because you can get air gauges with 2 needles. Really slick. And the neat thing about it is that it's easy to balance out, like both rear and both front. Just bring the needles together and I know I have the same pressure. Not that that's necessarily always what I'll do, because there may be an imbalance slightly, but I'll always know I want, say, 5 pounds more on the right, or who knows. Anyway, so one nice thing about that is that's sort of the last unusual thing to do to get it running. The rest is just Rover stuff. Get the floors in, get the sills in, get the doors on, get the hood on, fenders, breakfast. I mean, really, all that couple hours. So check in later, and we'll be looking like a truck pretty darn soon. See ya. It's beautiful Saturday evening, and I figure we'll go for a little run. Windshield's a bit filthy. Got the airbags completely full, and on my bumpy driveway it's pretty rough. Anyway, I'm going to put the camera down for a second, because I'm going to go out on the road. Pay some attention to driving. Well, I can tell you one thing, the ride is amazing, and I have the bags right full. Now, actually, there's no shocks on the front right now, but the truck drives beautiful. It's a little noisy because after all, there's no flooring yet. I'm not even sure you can hear any of this. But my God, does it ride nice. The steering's a little loose. I'll have to look at that. But on the whole, it's fantastic. I gotta change gears. Ah, that's nice. Beautiful night for a drive. Hope I don't fall out. Okay, so listen, body alignment. Putting the doors on, which means I have to finally deal with body alignment. My take on Land Rover body alignment is start with the tub. Well, yes, and the rear here, you do have the possibility of shifting the tub forward ever so slightly by dropping shims in here. But as far as I'm concerned, I've never found a Land Rover that was really required. So I just line it, bolt it up at the back. The front tabs have so much flex in them because they're tall plates that I never even bothered putting any shims in there. If it's off by 1/8 of an inch, I just pull it over. So basically, the tub defines the location of all the remaining bodywork. So the bulkhead's been on here for a month or more, but it's not actually bolted down yet. Well, it's bolted, but not tightened, because it's possible I'm going to have to add some shims in here between the outrigger and the leg of the bulkhead if I have to shift it forward. Of course, I can't move it backwards at all. So it's really the doors that define how everything lines up. And now that I'm putting the doors on, it's time for me to figure that out. The fenders have been on for a while, and the breakfast, and they all line up really well with the proper buffer size in here, it means that the breakfast is at the right height. Of course, there's a fair amount of adjustment in here, but it's certainly within reason. The fenders are lined up nicely, and so it looks pretty good. So I'm kind of hoping we're pretty close. So I start with the doors. I put the hinges on loose. You can see they're really loose there. And I try to set the latch side. You can see I've got nice new Series 3 anti-burst latches on here. So what I do, I take the little rubber buffer out that's in here, because they're usually way too tall to begin with, and it makes it a lot easier to do the alignment without them in. So here, I'll just close this door, if I can line it up. There we go. So that's latched. This crease line is pretty good. It's a little bit high, but I think I'll probably be okay there. This crease is relatively parallel. There's a bit of twist in the door, but that's okay, because these doors are in pretty sorry shape. They're twisted. At the front, we're relatively parallel. The gap's a little bit bigger at the bottom, which would suggest I might have to lean the bulkhead forward just a tweak. But it's so close, I'm much more likely to go do the other side first and see how it all is. After all, I like my trucks to run well, but absolutely perfect body alignment is not a real big issue for me. You can see all my sheet metal's all scratched up. What happened is all the various bits of sheet metal were outside in a windstorm, and the wind took them all the way down my gravel driveway, bouncing over each. It was disgusting. So everything but the tub is scratched to smithereens. But you know what? I'm not going to worry about it anytime soon. It's going to look fine, and it's a Land Rover after all. Anyway, let's put this door on and see how it looks. Okay, so I just want to show you how I do soldered connections. I often use this SJ00 whatever it is rubber extension cord wire, because it's really nice cable, and it's great when you're running 2, 3, 4, or 5 conductors to the same location. In this case, they're going down to the dimmer switch on the floor, which is a 3-position switch. Well, it's 2-position, but basically it's got common, which either is connected to the high beam or the low beam, so that's why you need 3 wires. This is a space where I really want to do a good quality connection, because it's on the floor inside the truck, and corrosion is going to be a big problem down there. So strip back the wire, and I'll put the spade terminals on. I use really good quality spade terminals. These are Molex. I get them at McMaster Car in the States. They are tinned brass. Some electrical connectors or terminals like this you can get in copper or brass. Copper, of course, is nice because it's a bit malleable, but brass is great for the tab connectors because it gives it more spring. Anyway, so I'm going to just give them a light crimp, just so that they're basically mechanically connected, and then I'll solder them. So let's just give these just enough crimp to make sure they're going to stay on while I do my work. Da-da-doo. It also makes sure that the void that the solder has to run into is fairly small. It makes a tighter connection. Okay, this is a relatively hot gun. I don't know how many watts it is. 250, but it still seems to take a while to heat up. I used to have a really nice gun that was warm as anything. Okay, so when you solder, you always want to heat one side of the terminal and apply solder from the other side. That guarantees you're not melting the solder with the gun, but you've actually got the wire and terminal hot enough to melt the solder. Because if you actually melt the solder with the gun and just let it drip onto the terminal, you never know that you've really made a good solder connection. You just sort of are dropping blobs of solder onto the terminal. So once it gets good and hot, I don't know if you can see because I'm working on the other side. I'll try to do one of the other terminals so you can see it. Now I'm pouring solder into the top of this terminal and letting it flow right down inside, and that's a beautiful little connection. Let's see if I can turn this other one around so you can see me as I do it. Do this one left-handed. Alright, so again, I'd use the side of the gun. I always do this in a vise because you really need 3 hands. Or I don't always do it, I try to. So I wait for it to get good and hot. You can usually tell if it's hot if some of the flux starts to burn that's left over on the gun. So here we go. Just start to see it. There we go. It's melting solder on the terminal, so I know that the whole terminal and wire is hot enough. And I just keep filling solder in until I see it start to flow out the bottom, which means I know it's filled the entire void. Perfect. Let that cool a bit and put some shrink tube on. Now you do want it to cool enough before you put the shrink tube on, because if you start to slide the shrink tube down while it's hot, it's going to shrink on you before you can get it on, and that can be really annoying. With shrink tube, again, use high quality. This is soft core, which is there's basically two layers to it. On the outside, it's the shrink tube that shrinks, and inside there's another plastic that melts, and it sort of foams up. And what that does is it kind of creates a great big. It fills all the voids inside quite well. You'll see it ooze out at the end. I do one other thing. I just have to bring it over. Hang on. And that's that I slather silicone grease, dielectric grease, all over these contacts before I do the shrinking. That pumps any silicone grease into any little voids that it might be and resist further corrosion. It'll actually wick up between the various strands of the wire up into the insulation. Sometimes when you take a wire apart or you cut a wire, you see it's all black inside. That's because corrosion has actually worked its way up between the strands. The way to get around that is to use all tinned wire. Marine grade, every single strand is tinned all the way. Extremely expensive. And in principle, I'd love to do that. But I've been happy enough doing this that I've found my connections are pretty good. Okay, so the shrink tube I use is just the right size to slip over after you've made the connection. If you use smaller stuff, you got to make sure you put it on before you do your soldering. I actually use the shrink tube to create an insulated boot over the terminal itself. That works pretty slick. And then we just shrink them. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so now you can see this sort of gluey goo that's coming out. It's really sticky. Well, that means it's really, really sealed in there, and that makes an excellent connection. Some of these shrunk back a little further from where I'd like them to be on the terminal, so while they're still soft, I'm going to slide them back up a bit. There we go. Not that there's any chance of these shorting out, because on the dimmer switch, they're mechanically held apart, but I think it just makes a slicker connection if they're almost entirely closed in the boot. Excellent, good and sticky. And the last thing is just to bring up another piece of shrink tube that I put on in advance that will basically just close up the end of this so that this is a little tidier here. Good enough. All right, that's the kind of connection I like to do. This will last a lifetime. Cheers.